Hi, welcome to Just Passing Through here on Cleveland Rocks. I'm Alan Green. You know, as a fan of the blues, I really I'm excited to have as our guests this week two musicians who had a great deal to do with bringing the blues back into the spotlight. All you guitar players, listen up, because I'm talking about Stevie Ray Vaughan and his brother Jimmie Vaughan. Welcome to Cleveland Rocks, you guys. It's great to see you. I'm very happy that you're here.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Let me mention that Jimmie Vaughan is a member, of course, of the Fabulous Thunderbirds. Stevie Ray Vaughan had your own band, Double Trouble. Okay, now you both you grew up, obviously both your brothers, you grew up in Texas, originally Dallas, I think, and then you moved to, let me think, Austin. Okay. This might be a hard question, but what characterizes the Texas blues, let's say, as opposed to the Chicago blues, you know, the people who aren't really into blues? What do you think characterizes the difference?
That is tough, but I don't know if there's really that much difference, except that one way to get out of this question is in Texas there was T-Bone Walker and Latin Hopkins, and then we were next door to Louisiana, which had all the Excello type stuff. So it has a little different regional sound when the electric blues was really going, say, in the 50s and the 60s. But you have guys from Texas that went to Chicago and made it in Chicago back in the blues days we're talking about, and you have guys that went to L.A. and guys from L.A. that went to Chicago. So I don't know the answer to that, really.
At first, I think there was probably more of a difference, and now it's more of just a mixed match of styles. You know, like the Chicago blues is usually got. When you say that, you think of the electric harmonica with the guitar. Usually in Texas, it was mostly guitar players with the horns behind them. So that's really the only difference I can think of, except maybe for the accents or something. I don't know.
Do you obviously come from a talented family. Is there anybody else in the family who's like musically proficient, maybe?
Well, aunts and uncles and grandparents and things. There were a lot of jam sessions at our family reunions years ago, but now there's still a few that play. We've got an Uncle Gerald that plays, and there's a few that do, but pretty much right now, as far as I know, it's just the two of us.
Yeah, it was mostly just sitting around the campfire, type stuff. You never know.
Let's talk for a second about Austin, Texas. It's really a hotbed of the blues. You hear of all these people coming out of Austin. Do you remember the local scene well? Have you kept in touch with the local blues scene there?
As much as possible. I live in Dallas now, for a little over a year. But what I remember about the scene there is when I first went down, Jimmie had already moved from Dallas to Austin, and there had been a blues and jazz scene and a country scene, but the blues and jazz was a lot bigger during, say, the 50s. Or as far as I know anyway. The B.B. King, Freddie King, Albert Collins, Albert King, all these people coming through all the time. And there were a lot of local musicians that were really good, that were doing backup bands. And a lot of times the musician would just come in by himself and have this hot band from there. Or pick and choose from several, which is what basically Antone's does now.
Right.
Okay.
That's kind of a legendary blues club there, isn't it?
But when I moved down there in '72, like I said, Jimmie was already there and the scene was already happening. And it was basically a deal where there were some bands that, as this whole scene started getting really cooking, there was some bands that had already kind of settled into their form. But as a rule, most of the bands would change members there was like a cycle of a 3-month cycle, there was a 6-month cycle, and a 9-month cycle. And everybody would just change musicians. If it got stagnant, the first sign of that, everybody would just kind of all break up, and they would all start just reforming until they finally got to where there was several more bands that had decided that's who they wanted to play with. Like the Thunderbirds have been together now for, 15 years, and Double Trouble for, God, nearly 10, So there's that kind of thing that went on, and with all of that switching around and working with each other, there's bound to be a lot learned and a lot of growth.
It's a pretty tight camaraderie, right?
Yeah, and everybody's, or not everybody, because that's just can't happen, but 90% of them, of all of us, are still real good friends and pushing for each other and pulling for each other whenever we get the chance.